Welcome to Telegeography Explains the Internet, the show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and my guest today is Vinay Prabhu, the Director of Product Management at Graphiant. We first had Graphiant's CEO, Khalid Raja, on the show a couple of years back to talk about his journey from being on the forefront of MPLS to SD-WAN and Viptela, and then NAS at Graphiant. Well, Vinay now joins us to explain the reasons that you should be concerned about your data in motion and what Graphiant is doing to ensure its safe passage. The purpose of networks, of course, is to move data around the world. That is exactly what we think about and talk about on the show often. But even still, we often think about data and applications mainly by what we do with them at the edge, or maybe how they're stored in data centers or the cloud. Vinay helps us think through what happens to that data between those 2 points and why that's a crucial problem that enterprises need to solve. Since Graphiant is a NAS company, we talk about how they are defining NAS as it has developed since we talked with Khalid Raja a couple of years back. Of course, we also have to touch on AI. And I really liked how Vinay put it, both AI for networks and networks for AI. Now, before I get to the interview, I want to say thank you, as always, for listening. And if you are enjoying the show, please pass it on to some friends or colleagues, subscribe and rate us, or leave a review on whatever platform you're listening. It really does help the show keep bringing you the content about the latest developments in telecoms and networks. Okay, enjoy the show. Welcome to the show, Vinay.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. And this is our second time having Graphiant on the show, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But first, could you give us a brief introduction of yourself and how you came to be the Director of Product Management at Graphiant?
Yeah, sure thing. So my career spans from working on the core routing of the internet with the
Hmm.
Alcatel-Lucent IP division, which was part of the Timetra acquisition. So worked on the core router, the provider edge router, then moved on to Viptela, where we got a chance to redefine what networking looked like with the SD-WAN story.
Hmm.
So got to work on the customer edge side of things, and then that got acquired by Cisco and was part of Cisco for a while, and then moved into the security domain. So moved from the core, the provider edge, the customer edge, then to the hosts and the servers themselves. So in the XDR space to look at the world through a security lens,
Oh,
and
you
that
got a
all
view from every angle then. That's really interesting. Yeah.
exactly. So all the way from the core to the perimeter, and then that worked really well for when Graphiant came out with its NAS story, the
Hmm.
whole the backbone as a service with the network offerings that Graphiant has, and the any-to-any connectivity that Graphiant brings to its customers. So that's where I am with Graphiant, stitching together the security, the
Hmm.
networking, and the core routing together.
Well, and that's interesting because we had your boss, the CEO of Graphiant, Khalid Raja, on the show a couple of years ago, and talked with him about the journey from him being at sort of the early MPLS deployments through the early SD-WAN developments, right? So it seems like you've joined along with him in part of that path coming to up to NAS and Graphiant.
Absolutely, yeah. Khaled's been part of the whole journey, and I've been mentored by him,
Hmm.
and I've been learning a lot of the networking side of the world and the evolution of networks through Khaled's lens.
Excellent. Yeah. So with that, we're going to talk later in the show a lot more about NAS specifically before we get to after we get to our main topic. But if you could just give us like a very brief description of what Graphiant is before we get started.
So Graphiant is a WAN NAS offering where we're providing network as a service. What we mean by that is we take the complexity of building the network, provisioning the network out of The picture allow businesses, enterprises to get connectivity from anywhere to anywhere, whether it's on-prem to cloud, on-prem to on-prem, cloud to cloud. Just offer it as a connectivity platform where all the
Hmm.
hassles about how to get your data from point A to point B are just taken out of uh, uh, the mess that networking can be at times, the
The
wires and all.
public internet is cheap and efficient, but also a dangerous and scary place. It's
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Excellent. Well, that cues us up very well for our main topic today, which is data assurance. So, if you're talking about getting your data from whatever starting point to whatever end point, how do you at Graphiant define data assurance?
A really good question, right? So we see data in three phases of its life cycle, right? So there's data at rest sitting in databases. There's data in processing that's being worked between application servers and so on and so forth. And then there's the data in motion piece where the data really moves from your private space into this ether of the internet, going from into the public domain and then hopefully reaching the destination it's supposed to reach. So Graphiant really wants to focus in on the data and motion piece of it. The network
Hmm.
should be participating in not only the data mobility piece of it, but the privacy and compliance piece of data as well. So that's
And
where
that
the,
is where
yeah,
data is most vulnerable, right? So it's the I have a good friend in the industry who Jason Ginter from Nitel, who has a blog that he's had for a long time called Bits in Flight, right? So bits in flight are where we're focused on the network side, but also where a lot of things can happen, right?
exactly. So I like to call it the data information highway. You get on the on ramp, get onto this information highway of sorts, and then get off the off ramp. And it's on this highway or the information highway where you're most exposed and vulnerable. So having visibility and control over that highway and getting your dedicated lane over there is fairly important, especially in this AI driven world where data is getting highly decentralized.
Hmm.
It's no longer just your data, it's data that you're distributing with LLMs and GPUs, B2B in a B2B kind of format. So I like to say that AI is a data hungry monster. The more you feed it, the more you can get out of it. But that also exposes you to a lot more vulnerabilities and privacy uh, uh, risks as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, of course, everybody listening to this show has most likely involved somewhere in the telecom industry, and first to mind is going to be security issues like deep packet inspection and things like that. But what do you see at Graphian as kind of some of the main key specific drivers for being concerned at the enterprise level or otherwise with data assurance in this current environment?
Sure. So I see three big factors, right?
Hmm.
Data mobility is important. We need the any to any connectivity today more than ever. It's businesses talking to businesses, machines talking to machines, users
Right.
talking to machines as well. So we need to maintain that flexibility to allow mobility of data, but we also need to ensure privacy of the data. So we need to know that it's reached the destination it's supposed to, it's encrypted, nobody else is snooping on it. We know the harvest now, decrypt later attacks are prevalent now. Infrastructure is at threat. So the infrastructure is getting pressurized as well
Hmm.
with this large amount of data decentralization that's happening. So privacy is a core concern, and then compliance, staying compliant, keeping
Mm.
up with the regulations is a big challenge for any enterprise that's really moving data in bulk today over the
Right, like GDPR, for example, and things like that.
Exactly, the GDPRs, HIPAAs of the world. So the PCI compliance regulations,
Hmm.
both from a governance and a government centric compliance regulation versus an enterprise compliance regulation like PCI. So you have a lot of compliance oriented needs which are getting even harder to maintain and monitor with
Hmm.
the way data is moving in this world today.
This is a pain point for enterprises that I talk to all the time, that networks are global in nature. We tend to, from the technology side, see the world as kind of flat, right? We're telegeography, so we think about geography a lot, but in reality, all of those networks are physically sitting on different countries with different regulatory agencies, different rules about the data passing in and out, and that makes the IT infrastructure manager's job a lot more complex than just is my network working, right?
That's right. And there are different challenges for different kinds of data as well. So we don't see data as a monolith either. So different
Hmm.
types of data need different kinds of assurances. So there may be HIPAA data, like I say, that needs to stay within geopolitical boundary. I don't want my medical records leaving North America, for example. So
Hmm.
the sovereignty of my data is really important. So, like you say, you want to restrict the motion within those boundaries, allow it to be flexible along those geopolitical boundaries, but then restrict it, make sure there are no paths outside. But then you
Yeah.
have the payment kind of data that may have different kind of needs, right? So it's more a performance assurance that you need for that kind of data. So your $5 transaction is as valuable as your $5 million transaction. So
Hmm.
making sure that the assurance that data gets is very different. A low loss or latency driven network is a kind of assurance you'd want to give to that kind of data. And then you
Right.
have really risk, like you would have a high like a very low risk appetite, and you want complete path control for data that maybe has a lot of national interest in
Hmm.
play, right? So you might want to control the assets it's going over. You want it to take a single provider throughout its journey, making sure that, hey, I trust the infrastructure that my data is traversing itself, or any combination of these three. So we see data as distinct categories themselves as well. So it's not a monolith. Uh, it's not one size fits all, I would say.
Right, right. Absolutely. And part of that challenge there is at the edge where the data is leaving your premises or whatever, and knowing what its destination is, being able to identify those different streams, have different policies in place for those different kinds of bits. You know, Vina, it makes me think of what I talked about with a colleague from Graphiant last time we had this conversation, where he was early in the MPLS days. And if we were talking, whatever, 15 something, 20 years ago, about this idea that MPLS took care of that with class of service designations, right? But we've moved into a world where, one, we wanted to get away from private networks because of the cost, and because of the destination of the data now being the cloud hyperscalers, no longer office to office and that kind of thing, towards this public internet being the sort of answer for that. But it really does create all these problems, right? So you've touched on this, but I wonder if you talk more about enterprises moving away from private networks and towards this world that you enabled at Viptela, for example, right?
Yeah.
And what you're thinking about now, and how to solve these new problems that arose when we were trying to solve those old problems, as it always goes, right?
Yeah, a really good question, right? So the MPLS side of the world. So I see that see the SD-WAN and MPLS as two extremes of uh, the scale, right? So MPLS
Hmm.
really was restrictive, but far more secure. So it gave you the security of the assets you were traversing, how the privacy that you were gaining, but it was highly inflexible, and the visibility into that infrastructure was completely lacking. So the
Right.
visibility control was lacking. You got security, but very little control. So you go to the other extreme where, hey, let's build SD-WAN. Gives you some amount of visibility, gives you control back, but now you're running over public infrastructure. So you
Hmm.
have very little control for your data once it's in motion. I like to say, you trust the ether of the internet to get you to an endpoint, right? So yeah, you encrypt it, but you have very little control on the performance of the internet or what the internet does with your traffic. So you
Right.
went from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum. So at Graphiant, what we're trying to do is, hey, you don't need to compromise on either. We need to
Hmm.
actually have the best of both worlds. Why not have the security and control that MPL has provided you, in terms of the infrastructure, knowing the infrastructure that you're traversing, having control over that infrastructure and the security that gives you, and then add the visibility that SD-WAN provided you, and giving you a granular, even more granular control at the edge to see what kind of assurance you want for your data that's in motion. So
Right, right.
that's the Graphian view of the world. I think it gets us in a unique and more a really powerful position to give the enterprise a unique level of visibility, observability for their data as it traverses the planet.
And not just visibility necessarily, but the ability to act on what you see through that visibility, right? So,
Absolutely. And it's not a binary action either, right? So
mhm,
I like to say it's beyond the firewall. The firewall view of the world is really block or allow traffic
mhm,
based on what you see. It's more about, hey, I can not only control the metrics that are available to me, and those metrics can traverse from the performance metrics, the SLA side of the world, the bandwidth, jitter, loss, latency, the traditional metrics, but also the posture that I want to keep from geolocation, the topologies I want to traverse, the assets I want to really move over. So it gives me absolute control at my fingertips to really control every aspect of my data in motion, because the infrastructure is really at your service.
right, absolutely. So, Vinay, one of the things, the show is called Telegeography Explains the Internet. One of the things I really like to do in the show is make sure that whatever sector of this you're working in, everyone is often laser beamed on a particular thing they do within the industry. I like to pull back, like I have over my shoulder. No one can see because it's audio podcast, but this map of submarine cables around the world, and really think about what's underneath all of that. So I want to sort of focus in with you on this, like, if you will, that we break the network often into kind of three key segments: the last mile, right, your data leaving your customer premises, and then the middle mile, when that's the kind of question mark part, right, the going over that public, and then the first mile. People think those are often kind of in the wrong order, but that's how we do it, right? The first mile, like getting to that data's destination, your whatever, your cloud instance, whatever that might be, whatever kind of data, right? So are you talking a lot about in this conversation really the data assurance over that sort of middle mile piece? Although you're saying it's end to end, but that's where a lot of the problems arise, right?
Yeah, the middle mile, but also the last mile. So, from our
Hmm.
perspective, we believe the business internet is very different from the internet for content uh,
Absolutely.
and all of that, right? So, think of Graphiant as the business internet. You want to consume the cloud over a private network. So,
Hmm.
you want to consume services that are important to you, like the O365s of the world, over a private network. So
Right.
want to pair our backbone with these services as well. So we have private peering with these offerings. So you are really trying to go on a private journey from the edge. You're allowed to control even the asset at the edge, the last mile, like
Hmm.
you say. You can actually have a carrier attribute saying that, hey, I want to stick to my service provider at the edge, that has continuity over the middle mile as well. So you can really control that. You can have a private network into the backbone of Graphian too. So you could
Right.
control it all the way from the last mile into the middle mile, completely private, into the cloud or the business offering that you really want to consume, and
Hmm.
any business offering that your partner vendor wants to provide to you in a B2B fashion as well. So it's not just restricted to the middle mile. We really
Hmm.
believe that the business internet requires a different kind of uh, uh, treatment from the content internet that was really built for the general public. So we see
Yeah.
ourselves in that domain. Yeah.
Yeah, no, really, that's a great point, and it's been interesting because one of the things we track at Telegeography is just how enterprise networks have changed over the years. And if you had asked me several years ago, of course, I would have said the use of MPLS was going to be on the decline because of these things, cost and the destination of the traffic and things like that we've been talking about, and that replacing that is largely internet. It has largely been in our data really a sort of like dedicated internet access, kind of rather than business broadband. We haven't seen that much of an uptake of business broadband as I might have expected a few years ago, because enterprises have just found in a lot of cases and locations, it's just not up to the task of what they need necessarily, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And things have to be really continuous and adaptive. The network needs to start participating in the security side of things.
Mm,
I believe it's security that should really program networking now. There is a level of convergence we see
hmm
that really ties these two worlds together, saying, hey, my security posture should not just use the network as a dumb firewall device.
right.
It should be able to really trigger and reprogram routing the way we think is important for the security appetite of the enterprise itself. So it's not
hmm
just about stopping the bad actors, it's also about moving assets in a format the security posture defines that's defined within the enterprise.
Yeah, that is a great point that I would want to put a pin in for all the listeners. Definitely that previously security had been something that you deal with, you layer on top of after you have the network, right? I've got my network in place, now I need to put the security in place. And you're saying that is very much the other way around now, that security is driving the way that you think about and create the network itself.
Absolutely. And we are in a unique position where we see all the data has to traverse a network at some point or the other. So when we are sitting in path, we should be participating in that. And
hmm
it gives us a unique visibility into what's moving where, and a bigger picture of the puzzle, right? It's not sitting at a server endpoint, just a small view of the world, or a host that's consuming traffic. All of them converge onto the WAN, converge into the data information highway. So that's a really, I would say, a unique vantage point from which you
hmm
can really view all your data all at once and see what's happening to that data. So
Right.
having security drive that motion really gives you a unique advantage to protect yourself, as well as get your data moving as quickly as safely as possible.
hmm So to wrap this section up, I would say maybe take me through just a little bit. Like if you're sitting down with a potential customer, right? How do you help them work through? Like, okay, so identify your data, identify its destinations, identify the particular issues that might arise with each of these data, and then how do we get to sort of network from that step, right?
Yeah, okay, so I'll walk you through four pieces of the puzzle. Like I like to put it for data assurance.
hmm
So Graphian's already taken care of the NAS. You're just consuming bandwidth to get you from anywhere to anywhere. So you plug the Graphiant in, and you have any to any connectivity. Consume it as you please. The first piece of the puzzle, once you start consuming bandwidth and getting your data in motion, is recognizing what that data is. Like I said, all data isn't equal. So
hmm
Graphene tries to get you application profiles of what the different buckets of data that are present in your network. So it's not just raw IPFix records or DPI records anymore. We try to bucketize these into ignore buckets. So I like to say, hey,
mm
everyone's trying to find a needle in the haystack. We're taking a different approach. We're like, let's get rid of the hay so that you can really let the operator get control of what they need to focus on. So we
Right.
create these large ignore buckets where we have things that are already running privately over the business internet of Graphene, things that you can safely ignore on day one. We have enterprise grade apps like the O365s of the world. We trust them. We know their security posture. Again, fair enough to ignore it. We have public apps like the YouTubes, CNNs of the world, folks browsing the internet at office. We trust those applications as well. You can ignore it. It's anything that sits outside these domains that need attention immediately. Anything that
Right.
comes in with threat intel, anything that is belongs to a URL or a category that we don't really trust, recognize, or we think is compliant to your enterprise's posture. These are the things you want the operator to focus on, really compress the data into information. We have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
data, there's very little information. So
Right.
application profiling is the first piece of the puzzle for data assurance. Now, once the operator recognizes what data is running in their network, we want to give them control of what kind of assurance each of these data buckets need to have. So, like I said, we then bucketize it into three large categories: the risk
Mm-hmm.
assurance, giving it a treatment of, hey, geofencing, getting your data restricted to geopolitical boundaries, sovereign boundaries. You have path assurance in terms of uh, controlling the data in motion over fixed carrier assets. And then you have the performance assurances, depending on what's more important to you: bandwidth, jitter, loss, or latency, or any combination of these elements. So you recognize your data, you give it the type of assurance you want. The next piece of the puzzle is giving the assurance is easy. The proof is in showing you that you really got that assurance. So, giving you real time visibility into the actual path that data is taken after you've given it the assurance. So, you know historically what the data has been doing and what it's doing, what that data is doing right now, so
Mm-hmm.
that you can really predict what it's going to do next. So for all your forecasting and all your forensics, you need this view of your world of how your data is moving, and almost Uber like feel. Once you book the cab, it's not enough to just book the cab. You need to see the cab moving from point A to point B, know every
Right.
turn it's taken along that path to know what your data is doing. So that's the third piece of the puzzle, giving you that real time visibility and access to your data in motion. And the
Mm-hmm.
last piece of the puzzle is giving you a report that you can generate on demand, see what your risk posture is, the gaps in your network, what you need to do better, what you're doing really good at, so that you can keep tightening this, because we know it's a process. It's not a click of a button and or a magic wand that solves all your problems within a day, right? So you need to keep working on it. You need to keep tightening your posture. So a report for both the CISOs, the CIOs of the world, and their teams to really work on tightening this security and networking world together to really get you to the risk appetite you have, and get you closer to a really secure business internet.
Absolutely. The more you know, the smoother it's going to be, right? So, yeah. So
Uh,
let's
for-
switch gears a little bit. Not really, because this is all sort of tied together. But I want to talk specifically now about network as a service, NAS, right? And I wanted to start with just that. Having watched this space over the past couple few years, right? That sort of there's been some creep in the definition, it seems to me, of NAS. Like originally, just very simply about like changing the contractual relationship, the idea of how we consume network to be like the X as a service kind of cloud things that everyone is familiar with. But I wonder if you see that at Graphiant, what's your current sort of vision for what NAS should be for the enterprise customer?
So NAS, from a Graphian perspective, really is evolving into something I like to say continuous adaptive risk assessment kind of posture, where you really
Hmm.
want to not worry about the X in the X as a service. So
Right.
we say, like the cloud guys got compute as a service. You really are not worried about the compute piece of it. It's all the services that you get on top of it that really create that ecosystem. So
Hmm.
from a Graphian perspective, the network's taken care of. It's the services that you get on top of it, and those include the any-to-any connectivity, getting you privately to the cloud, getting you all of that, the nice stuff there, getting you visibility, and now getting you security through the data assurance offering and more. Right, so you get into this world of really opening the doors in combining different fields into the network itself. Your security signals from vendors, from the EDR vendors, bringing your own agents, bringing your own signals into the network generating signals for you to consume, view, and really act upon, and then combining all of this with absolute control at the
Hmm.
for the operator to really uh, govern and move their data in fashions that they really recognize and really can control over any period, any distance, uh, yeah, over the global internet.
Right. So NAS moving kind of beyond just the idea of this is a different way to provision my network, a different way to contractually purchase my network, but really to the whole life cycle of the network, and then focusing on kind of what is the network actually doing for me, right? What does the enterprise need from the network? Not just, hey, we're IT, make sure that there's a network there so that we don't have to think about that, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And when I mean, well, when I say continuous and adaptable, we
Hmm.
no network is static. Data isn't static. The networks aren't static either. So you shouldn't
Right.
be thinking of the network as something you provision and forget. The network needs to adapt to what's happening with the data too. So
Right.
combining that, looking at always reevaluating, always assessing your data, assessing what it's doing, and then adapting your network to it on demand and really easily is an important pillar for NAS. So if my threat or security posture changes, my network needs to change to that posture, and it's not a
Hmm.
one-time change. You need to keep
Right.
assessing it. Just because a session was good on day one need not be in the same session user or entity is good on day two. So you need the network to recalibrate, re-optimize, and really adapt to what the demands are for your enterprise.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think to also put a pin there that in the MPLS world, in the private networks world, you bought a network for 3, sometimes 5 years. You were just sort of predicting how much bandwidth do I need at each site, and what are my data center locations, and that kind of thing. Whereas now in the IT world that we live in the security landscape that we live in, the network has to adapt to these things on an ongoing basis, especially as I think the network becomes an increasingly important part of the business strategy of whatever line of business you're in, as opposed to just a cost that we have to incur and something that just has to be there, right?
Yes, and it's not only the enterprise, the things that are happening within the enterprise, the geopolitical
Mm,
situations
that's a great
aren't
point.
getting any better. So you have to adapt to what's going on in your network. It's also what's going out in the world,
Hmm.
beyond your enterprise, beyond your domain as well. That you really need to adapt to really quickly on a day to day basis these
Right.
days. So that's
A
where
submarine cable is out.
yeah,
What does that do to my this piece of data, this thing that I'm running that's crucial to this sector of my business, whatever. Yeah.
absolutely. And I can't bring down my business just because of a threat or because of an outage. I need to
Hmm.
adapt. I need to really recalibrate how I do business because all of this has monetary impact. So keeping the lights on, keeping the business going while
Hmm.
maintaining the posture that I need to keep to feel secure needs an adaptable network. And that's where Graphian believes that's the as a service offering that Graphian wants to provide to its enterprise.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, so Vina, to sort of wrap things up here, I always like to ask folks what they see coming in the next couple of years. In this case, in the WAN with NAS and that sort of thing. And it wouldn't be 2024 if we didn't get to talk about AI. And I want to set that up as in two different ways, right? So there's one way that AI impacts WANs, in that now the compute needs of any organization are changing because of AI, the destination of that traffic, what they need to do with learning models and things like that. But also there's an aspect where AI becomes involved in networking as well. And I'm just wondering what you see in those two domains of businesses dealing with AI for all kinds of purposes and having the network accommodate that, but also realizing that AI is going to become potentially a really important tool for how they run the network itself.
Uh, Really good question, right? And we see the world in the same lens. There are two sides of the coin: the
Hmm.
network for AI and the AI for networks. So
Right.
I'll talk about the network for AI. Yes, that's what's driving the assurance story as well. The data is getting decentralized, and it's largely also driven due to the power demands that
Hmm.
AI has. So your data really isn't where you think it is. The power grid in North America may not be able to support the amount of data that
Right.
needs to be consumed by AI. We've seen customers being surprised that, hey, my data, I thought it was being munched locally, but it's being shipped off to somewhere in the Middle East where
Hmm.
where the power demands can be met, and the GPUs are really in GPU farms right there. So knowing
Hmm.
where your data is, getting you connected to these sovereign, almost embassy kind of environments where you get your data to places you trust and let AI consume it that way is the first piece of the puzzle in terms of the network for AI. So having the network adapt to these needs, get you to places you trust, get you that on demand, and allow you control on and visibility of how that's moving and being consumed is really important. And that's where we think the network needs to participate heavily on getting that control back to the user. And it could be anything from, hey, encryption regulations in regions don't meet my standards, I need to work around those regions completely to get to the LLMs or the GPU farms that I need to compute my data. I need to talk to other businesses because I'm not the one building the models. I need
Hmm.
to have a B2B kind of consumption. So all of that needs to be heavily driven by the network itself, the way that we program and provide control to the enterprises for their AI demands.
Right.
The second side of the coin was
Hmm.
the AI for networks. It, I see that being giving you access to the rich telemetry. Like I said, we are part of the information highway. We have all the information. We need to give you access to that information. So that's where AI could play a crucial role, giving you access to the information at hand, also giving you insights, forecasting abilities, so on and so forth, on what's going on in and around these information highways. So giving
Hmm.
you access, insight, all to really tighten your security posture. You really
Right.
want to tighten and control your data. So there are risks involved in exposing data to AI. So we are
Hmm.
cautious about that as well. We need to be cognizant about it. It's hard. There are questions about once you feed the data, how do you retract data from AI? Do you relearn the model, retrain the model? There's a lot of challenges there. So you have to be cautious about what we do with it, but it's a powerful tool to start giving the enterprises access and visibility into their data, as well as help them start forecasting what's going to happen in the future in terms of
Hmm.
their security posture and what they can do better from an operational posture as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think these are all things that that we're going to have to think through in the next couple of years. And it's interesting that you say forecasting, because there's a couple of senses of that, as a forecasting of like, okay, well, how am I going to deal with these, but also forecasting to the benefit of the network in the sense of uh, AI could get us to the point where it knows when and where the network is likely to fail and forestall that from ever happening in the first place. You know, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been talking a lot about the enterprise. Even from a service provider point of view, the forecasting is a very powerful tool to know where your
Hmm.
next pop needs to be, which pops are really profitable, where are the centers of data really, where are they
Hmm.
being computed and consumed, where does it make sense to really consume the power and compute from. So really building out the network uh, just analogous to the way the data is flowing and the way the data is being consumed. So it's a really powerful way of building out the network once you know what's happening on those information highway.
Yeah, that's a great point. So AI helping us make sure that AI can exist and grow in the future, right? So we need to have that physical infrastructure in place, just like you say that there are places where we're running out of the power and the facilities to run all of this. But then, ironically, AI can help us figure out how and where to develop those so that it can continue to exist, right? So.
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, this has been really fun and interesting, Vinay. Thanks so much for joining us. Before we go, just wanted to see if there's a place where listeners that might be more interested in you or Graphiant and what you're up to can keep up with you guys.
So I would encourage people to go to graphiant.com. We have a lot
Mhm.
of offerings and literature there for them to consume. We would be glad to get a demo going for folks who are really interested to get a look and feel and touch of what Graphiant has to offer. And if they want to get in touch with me, the best place is LinkedIn. I like to post stuff on LinkedIn. So things that I find useful, insightful for the broader community. So LinkedIn's the place for me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Likewise, that's my. I don't. I do blog at Telegeography, but a lot of it goes on LinkedIn. That's the way everybody's doing it now these days. So yeah, excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was great. Great catching up, and I hope we
Thanks.
can check in soon and see how the world is developing because it's going to be a tumultuous few years, I think. So
Yeah, exciting times, Greg. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. Telegeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at Telegeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com, and we'll see you on the internet.